let's begin, shall we? Couple of things just to uh, just to talk about real quick. Um, you might have many of you might have seen that letter that I sent out yesterday, or the day before, I guess, on Tuesday, which went kind of into effect yesterday. Um, I just wanted to let you know that I will be kind of tweaking a couple things. So, one with regards to the recordings, I'm not recording on Teams anymore. Okay, but what I will do is I'm going to record the morning class, this class, in a different way. So I'm not going to record it through Teams, and then I'm going to post it onto a YouTube channel that I've made. And if someone can remind me to talk about that YouTube channel when we're done, so that I can show you and give you the link for it. All right, and I'll post all the videos explaining the assignments and as well as the lectures on YouTube. All right, so you can use them there. I know a lot of you do use them if you're away um, or to refresh your understanding of the topics we're talking about. So I will talk about YouTube at the end, so you can have a spot to go find it. And then if you subscribe and like, maybe I'll become a YouTube superstar. Just like those two guys. The brothers who box. Who are they? Right there. Good morning, Angela. So that's the plan with that. I wanted to explain the marks a little bit better for you to understand that too. The marks, what I'm going to do is I will post the marks up on Blackboard, but I will take them down in a couple of days. Good morning, Vivian. So I'll post them up there. You'll get an announcement that says, or an email that should say that a mark was posted, right? So then you can go to it, check it, and I'll take it down. And then if you want to follow up with me with any feedback or anything like that, you can meet me during my office hours, which are 10:30 to 12:30 on Mondays, or we can also set up a time to meet and talk about it. All right? But we'll see how well that goes. I might end up just the learning story one. I really want to give you some good feedback so that you are so you understand what you're doing. So I'll probably give you a video feedback of your learning stories, but then I'll slowly wean off of that because understanding those learning stories is important. Especially you have 5 of them coming up, so if you keep making the same mistakes, you're going to end up losing marks on all 5 of them, and we don't want to do that. Okay, so we will try and keep this as inconvenient as possible without impacting you guys too much, but at the same time impacting the management a little bit more, so they start talking to us a little bit. All right. And thank you, Viviana and Daniela and Liv. And I know this is an awkward situation for you guys to be in, and it's an awkward situation for me to be in. All I want to do is really teach and give you guys feedback and that type of thing. But sometimes we have to do other things to make sure that we're able to continue doing that. And the only way our voice really isn't being heard right now, and the only person's voice that matters really is the student voice. So the more you guys tell our deans and associate deans and the presidents how much you dislike doing things this way, maybe the faster we'll be able to stop doing things this way. So, but I am sorry that you guys are getting caught up into this a little bit. But we also want to avoid a full walkout, strike or lockout too, right? So, I did that a couple of years ago, 4 years ago. I got hit by 4 cars. It's not fun getting hit by cars. My nickname is Speed Bump. Because they just hit me and keep going. Alright, but let's keep going here. So enough of that talk. We'll get into week 7. Alright. So, week 7. So this is going to be a very, unfortunately, it's going to be a very kind of boring, long-winded lecture. I'm actually going to just lecture you for about 2 hours. Why are you laughing at me, Jessica? It hurt. Yeah. Pickup truck. There was a pickup truck, and some guy in a Mercedes Benz. It was an older version of a Mercedes Benz. It was a student. He hit me, and then some lady, a soccer mom, hit me in her minivan twice. We'll keep going here. All right, so so again, this is gonna be a long-winded lecture. So I'll be just pretty much talking the whole time and showing you videos. So I do apologize for that. Try and keep yourself awake. Get a bunch of coffee, maybe a couple Red Bulls, and off we go. No, I had to tell her she was hitting me. Like, you're running me over. You're hitting me. She kept just driving. I'm standing here. You can't keep going. But soccer moms can get angry. Let me tell you. You don't want to piss off soccer moms. Alright. Then I had a retired police officer yelling at me. He was really mad at me. He was not pleased that I wouldn't let him go by. He was a police officer. Had no reason to go by, but he was really mad. We did an investigation on him. And me. Alright, let's keep going. But I didn't do anything wrong. I just stood in his way and told him, bugger off. He could wait. So we're going to review the learning stories. I've had a couple of people Karen, I've had a couple of people asking about the learning stories and how to present the learning stories. So there is a couple of ways that you can do it. And I'll talk about the learning stories, and I'll show you them when we get into the Tafahiki. And we'll kind of hopefully clarify that a little bit. I'm going to get really quite into the Tafahiki. I found out that the WH in this language sounds out like a PH or an F. So when I see that, that's an F. Far. And we'll talk about learning stories as assessments and what that looks like, and why we want to look at the assessments as from the learning story perspective. We'll talk about how does learning happen and the kindergarten program. We'll look at the 4 frames and the 4 foundations of learning in these 2 documents. And then we'll get into a little bit of Reggio, and this Reggio is kind of the one that started with the documentation, in a sense, applying this type of documentation in the child care centers, and then learning stories kind of took some of that. But we'll talk a little bit about that as well, or I will talk to you about it. So again, just get that Red Bull out and we'll get going. So, quick review of the learning stories. So learning stories are a way to make learning visible. Look at that. So it is the way to make learning visible. And what we're looking at, you'll hear that a lot, learning visible, making thinking visible. But you'll hear that a lot when we talk about documentation. Because that's essentially what we're trying to do. It's almost like a reverse assessment in a sense, where where other assessments, what we do is we check to see if the child can do the behavior, right? So you're doing a test, or you're doing a quiz, or a checklist, and you're seeing if they can do the behavior. So you're watching them for specific behaviors. For learning stories, what we're doing with that is we're trying to show, we're recording what the child can do, and then assessing it afterwards. So we're not really recording it for a reason, other than what they were doing was really interesting, right? So if that makes sense, or it can be for a reason, but you caught it, right? So they're doing some really awesome gross motor movement over there. I'm going to capture that. But you're not going into it saying, okay, I have to grade him on his balance or his gross motor. So you get him to stand on one foot, and then you switch over and that type of thing. So it's not really that type of assessment, but we're assessing afterwards. So if he or she are climbing across a balance beam, standing on one leg and then going back to the other one, and you document that, you can then make the interpretation of balance, right, and gross motor skills and coordination. Balance and coordination, right? So then, but you've assessed it kind of backwards. Where this one, you would get the child to do it, right? Or you would set up situations where you could use your checklist and just sit there and watch them and make sure, and get them to do it. Or in some cases, you pull them out of the class and get them to do certain things, and then so that's the different types. That's how we're trying to make that learning visible, if that makes some sense. There are lots of ways of documenting. There's documentation panels. There's lots of different ways to even create a learning story, too, right? And different combinations that you can do, and I'll show you a couple of them. The New Zealand one has actually changed a couple of times how they've suggested what to do with it. But what we're going to do with this one is I'm going to show you a way that I want you to do it. So that's the way you're going to do it for this time. But once you get out in the field and you start doing your own documentation, you can make it your own. Do it a little bit different ways and things of that nature. But you really want to consider those pieces that I've been talking about with regards to the title, the pictures, the story, the interpretation, or the what does it mean, opportunities and possibilities, and then the learning voice. And then if you get all that in there, that doesn't really matter how it's formatted or presented. It does matter, but I think you know what I mean. And it is a form of strength-based assessment. So like I said over here, we're focusing more on what they can do. In the checklist and the more summative assessment types, you're looking more at a weakness base, or in a sense you're trying to figure out what they can't do, right? Does that make sense? We're good? All right. Stories are used. Learning stories are used to engage children, teachers, parents, family members. It is a social cultural type of assessment, so we're looking at again Bronfenbrenner, and the idea that that culture and family and the community all have impact on the individual child and in different ways, and we want to respect that and add to that, right? And it is a way to plan and extend activities. So, excuse me. In an assessment, in a summative assessment, that's where you're doing a test at the end of a course, or you're doing a test at the end of or an assignment at the end of a module, right? So that's more of a summative. We've talked about this for 3 weeks. Now you're doing a test to see if you know and understand it. Or we've talked about this for 3 weeks. Now we're doing an assignment to see if you understand it. Right? So that's kind of a summative assessment. If you flip it on its head, we're looking at strength-based approaches. So we're looking at what they did and what they can do, and we add to it to strengthen or to extend the activities, or to bring it into a different to add or support different skills, right? So, for example, if the child really likes blocks, is there a way we can bring literacy into the blocks if it's something that he really and always does, right? So some of that can be put there as well. Using learning stories in childcare really originated in New Zealand by Margaret Carr and Wendy Lee. They wrote a couple of different books about it. Excuse me. And it is a result of a change in philosophy regarding pedagogical approaches to early learning. It's becoming more not just early learning, but it's becoming more around public education in general. They're trying to move towards a more strength-based approach across the board. But it moves very, very slowly. But they were able to do it in early childhood first. And but this is around the world right now. Most Western countries, England, like the Norwegian countries, Sweden, Finland, those types of places, in Canada, some states in the United States as well. We have Australia and New Zealand doing it as well, where they're all looking, and even like Japan and China are actually changing to a more constructivist approach. Now they're using a little bit different concepts, but they're all changing to a more constructivist approach to learning and understanding, and trying to work through the trying to work to change their curriculums in public education. New Zealand's excuse me. New Zealand's Ministry of Education developed the first bicultural education framework, and it is titled the Tawhahiki, and it was done in 1996. And that's where we're going to go next. We're going to talk about that a little bit more next, but as I promised last week, the Tawhahiki, what it is it is a curriculum guided originally, and it was originally published in 1996, and it was revised for just recently, about 5 years ago, by the Ministry of Education, and it outlines the curriculum for every childhood service in New Zealand. So all across New Zealand, they're using this in kindergartens, in childcare programs, in family programs. They're using this document. And it's mandated. They have to use it, and they have to follow it. So, and it is a bicultural document, which is something that I would really like to see Ontario try and mimic or copy the process that they went through to create this document, and have the different voices at this table instead of having separate documents. Right now we have a First Nations, Métis, and Inuit framework for Canada. I think Bonnie might have talked to you guys about that one a little bit. We have a French one in Ontario. It's different from the others, and then we have the English. How does learning happen, right? So, it's convoluted in the sense of that it's all over the place, and I think it would be really, really interesting to see if we couldn't combine these with the voices at the table instead of just telling people what to do, right? I think that would be really, really interesting to see if we can add language to it, First Nations language, Métis language into this as well, and combine it. So I think that would be really cool. We'll see where it goes. But for the Tafarhiki, what what they've done is they've set out four broad principles and four strands or goals for each of the strands. They make it look like a weave, like a weaving for baskets or I guess blankets or anything, right? So they're weaving it, and what they've done is they've combined the two languages into and the concepts from both cultures, both the settlers and the Inuit culture, not Inuit, the Aboriginal culture in New Zealand. I think they're called Maya. I think the Aboriginal culture or Inuit is called Maya. I'm not sure. Someone can fact check me if they could. So they have the two. So we have empowerment. I'm not going to try and say the other side. They have empowerment, holistic development, family and community, and relationships. And these are all connected. They're not. You can't separate them. But for the purposes of doing certain things like this, we're putting them. We're highlighting the individual strands, right? So it's important for us to recognize that, and sometimes I forget too when we're looking at specific goals or specific activities or skills. We have to recognize how many other things are actually happening there too. So there's a lot of cognitive, a lot of language, a lot of other things that are happening when someone's balancing on a balancing beam, right? So it can be quite interesting, quite amazing to really kind of think about everything that's happening. But anyways, they look at it as strands, and they have the well-being, so they have the 5 different strands, and they also have the goals, so they do have associated goals with it. So in this case, they have children experience an environment where their health is promoted, their emotional well-being is nurtured, and they are kept safe from harm. Then we have belonging. The other thing we can look at too is these strands that we have. Think of them also as you're listening to them, how they connect to EARL61, right? So for the behavior guidance course, when we're looking at those 6 life skills, right? So think about those as we're going through all of these different curriculum models or frameworks. So we have how does learning happen, the kindergarten program, and think about beyond behavior management, those 6 life skills, and see how these connect to it. Right? Because the 2 right there, we have belonging, which is one of the ones that is in the kindergarten program, well-being and belonging, as well as how does learning happen, I believe. And belonging is also one of the ones we're going to be talking about this week in our EARL61 class too. So the goal here is that children and their families experience an environment where connecting links with families and the wider world are affirmed and extended. They know they know they have a place. They feel comfortable with routines, customs, regular events, and they know their limits and boundaries of acceptable behavior. The contribution, again, so think about those other ones. Opportunities for learning are equitable, and each child contributed his value. So the goals here, we're looking at the children experience an environment where there are equal opportunities for learning, irrespective of gender, ability, age, ethnicity, or background, and they are affirmed as individuals, and they are encouraged to learn alongside others. Communication. So here we're looking at the languages and symbols of their own and other cultures are promoted and protected. Children experience an environment where they develop nonverbal communication skills for a range of purposes. They develop verbal communication for a range of purposes. They experience the stories and symbols of their own and other cultures, and they discover and develop different ways to be creative and expressive. And then the last one is exploration, and that children experience an environment where the play is valued and meaningful learning and the importance of spontaneous play is recognized. They gain confidence in and control their bodies. They learn strategies for active exploration, thinking and reasoning, and they develop working theories for making sense of the natural, social, physical, and material worlds. All right. Those are those 5 different strands. We're going to watch this YouTube video, and on the Tafariki, you can tell me if we'll be able to find out if I said it right. And I don't think it's very long, but it will talk about a little bit of the history of it as well. All right, please let me know if you could hear it with a thumbs up, and we'll get going here.
Tafariki was revolutionary, and it was the inspiration of some really passionate educators who believed in children, not only children, but how they learned, and more importantly, which learning.
Sorry, I'm just going to turn off my mic and my camera for a quick second. Not for a quick second, while we're watching the video, sorry.
Matters.
It was our first curriculum. It was the first to integrate education and care, and it was the first to have elevated the status of infants as learners and toddlers and young children.
Te Whāriki, the New Zealand Aotearoa early childhood curriculum, is 20 years old and remains a hugely popular, world-leading document still. Yet it's easy to forget that the origins of the curriculum were inauspicious. In the early 1990s, the very idea of one curriculum for the 0 to 5 sector was anathema, and when the proposition was presented to a gathering of the sector, there was widespread disapproval.
The outrage was so extreme that the ministry was asked to leave the room, apparently, while these organisations debated, because we don't need a curriculum. Play Centre knew what they were doing, kindergarten knew what they were doing. People working with infants and toddlers had their own approaches, but the notion of a combined curriculum, even using the word curriculum, was an anathema. Kohanga Reo were there and were deeply concerned, because what would it mean for Kohanga Reo if there is a national curriculum?
However, knowing that the ministry was determined to proceed, leading figures within early childhood joined to create a single bid to design the curriculum. This resulted in a final document that the minister was obliged to accept because it had been widely consulted over, trialled and supported across the sector.
The consultation was pretty amazing. All up and down the country, small groups from Play Centre, from Steiner, from Montessori, from childcare and kindergarten and so on, all met together. Then they talked about what we should do. So that was really, really important. In the very old days, a ministry would sit down and write a curriculum, and it'd be a small group of people, might be 1 or 2 people. But we did it, in a sense, the Aotearoa New Zealand way of collaboration.
That was the beginning of Te Whāriki, very political, very sensitive, and it's one of the unusual stories in early childhood policy history, is that in this era of extreme right-wing thinking about education, there were cuts going on, the mother of all budgets, there was bulk funding debates, the teachers were on the streets, yet we were able in some way, partly because we all stuck together, to go under the radar in a way and create what became Te Whāriki.
Absolutely critical to the making of Te Whāriki had been a partnership with the Kohanga Reo National Trust, who loaned Tamati and Tilly Reedy to the writing team. The result was a uniquely New Zealand curriculum.
It's both bilingual and bicultural, so it responds to the Treaty of Waitangi. And I want to read something that Tilly said at an OECD meeting in 2014. After 200 years of educational history, Māori was, for the first time, being given the opportunity to influence a new curriculum that would touch the minds of future New Zealanders.
One critical effect of a genuinely bicultural curriculum was the placing of child agency at its centre. On just the second day of the original working group's deliberations, this was established.
The Māori working group came back first and almost in a sense said, we've designed the curriculum, put it on the table, and it is around the notion of mana and empowerment. And they listed the 5 mana that are Te Whāriki today.
Mana, or empowerment, encourages the centrality of family, whānau and culture.
Yeah, it's a document that's holistic and it looked at the whole child, not just as themselves, but in the context of their family and their community, the world as they saw it.
Te Whāriki sees the child as coming in already competent and with their own understandings of the world and how it works. And so teaching and learning becomes a thing of co-construction, so we're teaching and learning together. We don't have all the knowledge and all the power. We share that with the children and we learn and work together.
It's not been a transmission model where we have had to be didactic and say do this, that and the other thing, but we've actually worked together, and that idea of the reciprocal and responsive relationships, that has been an incredible catalyst, I think, for teachers. It has meant that there's been these ideas, this respect for children's rights.
It is what matters to the child, and we've been on such diverse tracks as looking at dog kennels or what you can make with a cardboard box. The beauty of it as a teacher is we never know what's going to arise tomorrow, but we do know that it's going to be exciting, but it's going to also be what matters for that child.
What matters most is that children develop dispositions that will prepare them for later life, as articulated in this quote from Te
They
Whāriki.
say, and I still love this quote, early childhood is a period of momentous significance for all people growing up in our culture. By the time this period is over, children will have formed conceptions of themselves as social beings, as thinkers and as language users, and they will have reached certain important decisions about their own abilities and their own worth.
In Te Whāriki, we're thinking about dispositions to learn. It could be things like playfulness, things like curiosity, persevering, being able to work alongside and with others, dispositions to learn.
I think when we look at the Dunedin studies, that actually is reinforced that we're doing the right thing with our curriculum, that we should be looking at how children learn and why they're learning. Those that are resilient and strong and have good self-image are the ones who are going to do best in society.
Te Whāriki doesn't only recognise the agency of preschoolers, it acknowledges babies, infants and toddlers as active learners.
Was very radical, and I think it still is very radical to see infants and toddlers as confident and capable in being able to take control of their well-being in the exploration, the communication, learning their social skills, how to be, how to interact with people, how to negotiate, learning how to move their bodies. So it provides the core and the base for all their future development.
Te Whāriki does not tell teachers what to do. There were people who wanted a curriculum that told you what to do. And one large chain operator advised Margaret and I, just make it easy for my gals so they'll know what to do on Monday. However, we, from the start, had this vision of a fully qualified early childhood teaching workforce. Now, we couldn't put that into Whāriki, but we did pitch it at a level which assumed teachers would have the theoretical knowledge, the cultural knowledge, the professional judgment to weave their curriculum with their children, with their whānau, with their colleagues.
It lifted the profession out of child care and talked about early childhood education, not preschool. And so that shift in discourse has been very significant.
Every centre should have early childhood education qualified teachers, course, we always want more teachers in a centre and the ratios to be better.
An extraordinary achievement of Te Whāriki has been its inclusiveness, the way it makes a place for all children, their families and their communities.
Te Whāriki is a metaphor really for us to be able to weave whatever we want in our curriculum for our children. We can consider things like going on noho marae, like taking the whole centre and the families to a marae that's got some significance to the families. This curriculum does leave it open for us to be able to follow all the spiritual ceremonies, to use the karakia that we want to use waiata and any other significant Māori spiritual ceremonies.
This document has led us to the forefront of international education. We become the focus of interest where we are doing something revolutionary, and a number of countries have certainly picked up from that document and led their countries in similar directions.
It's interesting now to look at other national curricula who have also, other countries which have also developed this notion of an aspirational view of the child, and then saw some goals or principles and a framework with which to work. It's not the activities, it's about the child and the child's learning and the cultural context in which that occurs.
How was that one? Before we get into the how does learning happen, I want to show you a couple of different exemplars from the Tawhahiki, and just go into that a little bit. I just have to find it. I think it's in my Blackboard. There's a couple of different ones. Let me just go into it real quick. I have to apologize for not being ready for this. If I do start working while the slides are going, it stops the video, so I can't do any of this while you're. That's my excuse. Now I could have done it before. That would be just crazy. Let me just grab this one. Here we are. So, if we look at examples of the learning stories, I'll show it to you here. Just make sure that sorry, just making sure that that's not it. That's not it. That one must be it. Not showing it. Right. Alright, so we look at I was trying to set up the video recording. I'm trying to record it, but it's the screen capture seems to be awkward. But anyway, you know what I could do? Let's do it this way. There we go. Alright. So these are a couple of exemplars. So it's a couple of ideas around the learning stories. So their learning stories are. Well, this one didn't. That one's not what I want to show you. They write them a little bit differently right now. So they're doing it in by day. So they have a couple of different stories here, and then they started taking some pictures and what happened here, and then so that's the what happened here. Then they're looking at the specific skills more, reciprocal and responsive relationships with people, things, and beings. Right. So they're showing how that worked, and then what this might tell us. And you can also move. They also have another. What am I trying to say? They also. What I was trying to say. So this is more like a documentation panel in a sense of what happened in March and April, and then in May, and then they show these different pieces. Now, what I like to see is this single page kind of thing. You could do it like you could do it the way we showed you before, which is the PowerPoint presentation. But you can also have it on a single page with a couple pages with your pictures alongside of it. I want to show you another one because I do want to make sure you're getting or understanding a little bit of what we're talking about. I'll find it. So here's one. I'm not sure. Let me just. Can you see this one? Oh, you couldn't see the other one either.
No, Richard, you're sharing. Yeah, there we go.
I'm not sharing the right screens. So this is a learning story. Oh, sorry, I missed. You'll be able to see it on the video. What I was talking about. All right, so here's some examples of different stories. So they have the story. What learning is happening here? So that's the what does it mean, or the interpretation, right? What happens next, right? And then you want to have that family voice. Okay, so you can do them like this. You can't really see them very well. They have learning story templates. Oh, yeah, you have to pay for it though. That's awesome. Alright. So there's some different ways. I'll find some better ones. But you could do it like this too. When you do your pictures, what the heck is that? When you do your learning stories and you have pictures in there, try and get your pictures to match up with what you're talking about or what you're highlighting in your story. Okay, so just don't randomly grab whatever pictures you can. Try to make them connect to the story and what you're talking about. All right, so do try and make sure that that's happening as well. All right, does that make sense? So you can do it on a single page or a couple pages, or you can do it on a PowerPoint presentation. When you are in your programs or working in the field, it's easier to do it on a single page than it is to do it on a PowerPoint, because the PowerPoint, you have a lot of different slides. Now you can use PowerPoint and just do a couple of slides and try to manipulate it in there, because sometimes people find it easier to add pictures and navigate through it. So I do know some people do like to have to use it on PowerPoint. If you have, I think Word's probably the easiest, but if you're familiar with Publisher, you could use that as well. But it's up to you how you want to how you want to do it, all right, how you want to present it. The only thing is with the learning story, like I said, is you need to have those 6 pieces. So make sure you do have those 6 pieces, or 6 parts of that learning story. So again, we can say it together. There's the title, the pictures, the story, which is first person and past tense, the what does it mean, or the interpretation of your observation. That's going to be called what does it mean. That you're writing to the child. Okay, we're writing it to the child or the children. And then the next is opportunities and possibilities. So where you're going to go next with this. And then a single page with a family voice at the top of it, or family comments. I like family voice better because I want them to add to it instead of just commenting on what you made. You want them to kind of interpret the data as well and talk to you as well about it, if that makes some sense. So just asking for a comment like, oh, that was awesome. That you're not asking them to comment on your work. You're asking them to comment on what the children were doing. Okay, that makes sense. The other thing is there are 2 children there. Capture both of them. When you're working in the field again, if you capture both of them, you can talk about both of them in your what does it mean. You can separate it a little bit, so you can have one paragraph for both, and then you can have a shorter sentence or 2 for each of the others, for just the 2 individual children, and then you can, or you can just talk about the individual children by themselves. But if you do it that way, you have now, if you copy it, you now have 2 pieces of 2 learning stories, or 2 documentation, or pieces of documentation to go in each of the children's portfolios, right? So. And that can be done across the board too. So you're in a sense of, if you have more children, you would write the single story, and then you can write the what does it mean for the individual children, if that makes some sense too. Do you know what I mean? So as a teacher, you're working a little bit less, I guess, if that makes sense. Does that make any sense, what I'm saying to you? How many people fell asleep? Daniela didn't. I knew you didn't fall asleep, Daniela. Oh, there's Liv too. There's a bit. All right. Oh, Jesse's okay too. All right, let's keep going then. Do we have any questions about the... there's one more video. Actually, there's a video I want to show you. Kind of explaining the topic. I ended up doing this last week or yesterday, and where is it? Just give me 1 second here. I'll show you what I'm doing. I'm looking for, there's a video of a child, of a group of children working through, there we go, working through a workshops, the videos. Let's see if they have the videos here. Here it is. This is a video of a local story, and they've created it into a project. So I just want to give you an example of a project that lasts a very long time, and you have so many different things going on in it. And if the children are really, really engaged in the project's topic, in a sense, that it becomes something that, as teachers, you can manipulate and capture your whole curriculum within that single project. So I'll show you your whole curriculum, all the expectations within a single project. So I'll show you this one. This is exploring a local story. It's called Voyageurs. I can't make it bigger. I tried. You can hear it still? And you can see it?
My name's Kathy Wall. I work at Kids First Kindergarten.
Thank you.
We are in Littleton, which is in Te Waiponamu, the South Island, and we're in a busy port town. Tamatea Pōkai Whenua is a Māori adventurer from the 1300s who travelled around Aotearoa. We were first introduced to this story by a colleague who created a book about his adventures in Whakaropō, Littleton Harbour. So there are several different versions out there about Tamatea's adventure. We were able to consult with our local iwi and really make sure that we were doing the version of the Pakiwaitara that they were happy with. Initially we started with the picture book, and once they had started to retell the story themselves with the picture book, we moved on to making a model of Te Pōhoa Tamatea, which is the mauna, the mountain in the story. They then used this model along with props to retell the story. Then we noticed that they were taking elements and concepts from this Pakiwaitara and using it in their own play, and we wanted them to really think about what it would have felt like to be Tamatea and his whānau out on Whakaropō. So we supported them to reenact the story and to make a backdrop and resources that they needed. So they're now retelling this story through drama. Some of the resources we've created have included silhouettes that we've used on overhead projectors and on light boxes. Our children are now at the point where they know this Pakiwaitara so well that they can even make and illustrate their own books. We have one child who has retold me the whole story and then done all the illustrations, and she now shares that book with her peers and her whānau. She's very proud of herself. So her being able to tell this story and create the book tells me that she has a very in-depth understanding about this Pakiwaitara and how it affects people around them and her own whānau. She's added elements on that really are important to her. Most of the tamariki were involved in the reenactment, but some were still observing, so we wanted to ensure that these children had another means of retelling a story and deepening their understanding. So we introduced a storytelling app that they were able to use quietly by themselves to really express what they understood. Then we were able to share this digital platform with peers and whānau. The children also use paintings, drawing utensils and clay to represent their understandings, and we've made books and we celebrate all their artwork throughout the kindergarten. So this really in-depth look at this one Pakiwaitara has given the children the opportunity to really explore their understanding. They think a lot and talk a lot about what it would have been like to live in Aotearoa hundreds of years ago, what the clothing would have been like, what the food would have been like, what the means of transport were, even what the family structure was like. So we've really been able to explore the story and unpack it with them. We've now discovered that the children are going home and telling their whānau members about Tamatea, where he's been and what his adventures have included, and also where our landmarks in our local community have come from. As kaiako, we have really come to understand how important it is for children to value their place in the community and have a feeling of belonging. Through this Pakiwaitara, they've been able to have an understanding of this and make links with the local landforms, the local iwi, just the whole local community. And that's really strengthened their sense of identity.
So why I wanted to show you that was because of the what's going on now? There we go. Right. So why I wanted to show you that, and transmitting traditional knowledge or myths and legends of the Maori. For anyone else who's wondering, thank you. Yeah. Even these tribal communities. Yeah. So that's if you see what how they're doing it with adding the indigenous stories and those types of things in language into the curriculum, right? And you could see how that works. You could see how it would be really interesting to, and yes, thank you very much, Liv, for helping us out with that. You can see how that's interwoven within the curriculum, and instead of having all these separate entities and silos and everybody's separated, if you put them all together, it would be really, really beneficial, I think, for us as a community to understand our First Nations, Métis, and Inuit peoples, and understand ourselves and understand the French communities, and really get the different perspectives and understanding of the different ways of thinking, right, and different ways of knowing. That's another kind of thing that's coming out right now, is this understanding of the different ways of knowing. And that's a really interesting concept when you're trying to think about it, because how I know things or how I understand things is from a very singular perspective, in a sense. So I don't know any other way to know, if that makes any sense. So being exposed to other ways of thinking and understanding is really important in understanding people in general. Right. So let's get into how does learning happen. You'll see the similarities between how does learning happen in the Tafariki, and we'll also see Samoan languages. Yeah, I think Samoan. I think I don't know, but they do mention Samoan in. So I don't in some of the videos that I've done and the research I've done with regards to the Tafariki in New Zealand. So they did mention that. So I wonder if it's closer to there or not. No. You don't see the lecture slides or the videos? Does anybody else not see anything? Daniela can. Can everybody else see the? Maybe saying me. Maybe you're at your computer. Okay. Everybody can. Okay. So maybe you might have to look at your computer and see if it's see what's going on with it. You could see the video before though, right? The computers are messing up today. Oh, it took a bit. Okay. But the other thing with regards to that project is you can see that it wasn't just a day or two. It was more. It lasted a very long time. They did a lot of different things with it. They had the dramatic play, the play itself. They read the books. They retold the stories with puppets and a model, right? They did clay work. They did retold the story in shadows and all those other things, right? So all of these things are happening, but it happens over a period of time, and it's not. And it kind of just flows, in a sense. We're not trying to, so we're not trying to, as a teacher, when I say, oh, you know what we should do? We should do a play. It's not like that necessarily. It's more about watching the children, they're reenacting it in a different, in your block area or in the dramatic play area, and you see them reenacting it. That's where you want to kind of guide, and then you help them. You think about, oh, maybe we should do a play. Maybe we can reenact this in a play, and then they painted the backdrop, and then they talked about how they could do it, right? So there's more than just it's not just like okay, we're going to do this tomorrow and this the next day and this next week, and you're following the children, and it's a slower process, and you slow it down, and it can last a while, and you go back and forth to it as well, right? It's not okay, this is all encompassing for the next 4 months. That's not what happens. It's sometimes it's chunked in between with other things, so they're really interested in that story, and then all of a sudden they start talking about something that happened. Maybe the garbage trucks keep coming by to pick up for something, so they get interested in garbage trucks for a little while, and then you have a smaller kind of interest with that, and then they come back to the original one too, right? So, and the other thing is, not everybody needs to be involved. Some children are going to be involved, and they're going to have more people, and it's going to become like a big thing for a little while, and then you'll see that some of them go away, and then others are still interested in it, right? This happened with my skating a hockey project. Basically, what it was is in Oakville. What we did was we made a family member came. So the kids were talking about hockey a lot. They liked hockey, and they were talking. They just started hockey. These guys and skating, and so we had a kindergarten class and an older preschool classroom. And they were really, really interested in hockey. And this was a time where we had the Olympics too. It was the first time the Olympics, the NHL went to the Olympics too. So that was there. So the kids were really interested in it. So we started talking about it. And one of the parents, well, actually it was one of their teachers. Their kids were really into hockey, and she made an ice rink outside every year in her backyard. So she made a backyard ice rink every year, and she was talking about how she built it. So I said, well, maybe we should build one outside in our playground. We had a huge playground, and we also had this space in the back which was fenced off, where we had some sheds and things like that. So we made a rink back there. We asked one of our parents came and flooded it for us, and he put all the ice in, and every morning I would go out and flood it for the kids. We put a hockey net out there. Someone donated a hockey net to us, and then we also went to the store. We took a trip to the Salvation Army. I took 10 kids to the Salvation Army with me, and we went and bought some skates for some of the kids who didn't have skates, and we asked parents to donate skates and hockey sticks and helmets and things. So we went in and we had all these skates and hockey sticks, and we played on the ice rink, and then the whole center really started engaging in the hockey rink and going outside and skating, and they would skate and just play on the ice and move it around and things like that. So it was a lot of fun to do, but it lasted for such a long time. But then a lot of the kids weren't interested in going skating anymore, but there was a few that loved skating and loved playing hockey. So I would grab a couple of the kids when they're supposed to be having nap time and grab them and bring them out. I would pop in and see if they were sleeping. Are you guys sleeping? No, come on, let's go play. I was the supervisor, so I took my lunch breaks and played hockey with the kids outside. But eventually only a few kids really were engaged in it. So so that's kind of how it goes. It can kind of peak and fall, but it grows and comes back. But like I said, not everybody was doing it. The kids were looking up scores, and they were looking up how their kids did, how their favorite players did in the newspapers and things like that. So it was a lot of math, a lot of science, a lot of gross motor, obviously, but it was quite an interesting project. So it can go up and down, and you can see that that project will last a long, long time, but we're not forcing it on them. They're you're guiding them towards those. Okay. I'm just reading what Liv is mentioned. Samoa, Tonga, Maori, Hawaiian are all common Polynesian languages, so I imagine they're quite similar or have similar roots. Yeah, very good. Thank you. Very good. Thank you. So we have the how does learning happen. You guys are going to get sick. You're probably already sick about hearing about how does learning happen. But we're going to get into it. We're going to keep getting into it over the next couple of years, and the kindergarten program, and dig into it a bit. And you may have done this already with Kim and Bonnie and all those guys, but we're going to do it again. So how does learning happen is a professional learning resources that guide learning through relationships for working with young children and their families. It's intended to support pedagogy and curriculum program development in the early years programs. So this is similarly to the Tafariki. It's about the whole early years programs. Now, what happens is that the how does learning happen and the kindergarten program overlap, but there's two separate things, right? We're seeing it as two separate things. It's not like the Tafariki was for kindergarten as well, right? So it was for everybody 6 and under. Whereas how does learning happen is for 0 to 6 or 0 to 12, I guess, with our school age programs. But then you have the kindergarten program, which is also for children between the ages of 4 and 6. So there's a little bit of a discrepancy between the two. But how does learning happen does have the 4 frames, right? So they have the 4 foundations, I should say. And these four foundational conditions are suggested to be what they need to have. So you see again the belonging, well-being, expression could also be language, right? And actually language might be, or communication might be just as good there, but expression, and then engagement, which could also be looked at as collaboration, and yeah, all right. So that's where you have those 4 foundations, and we'll talk about them a little bit more, but the 4 foundations apply regardless of age, ability, culture, language, geography, or setting. They are aligned with the kindergarten program, and they are conditions that children naturally seek for themselves. Okay, and that's those 4 frames, with the educators and families in the middle. And we'll go through each of these real quick. So belonging refers to a sense of connectedness to others, individual experience of being valued, of forming relationships with others, making contributions as part of a group, a community, and the natural world. Well-being addresses the importance of physical and mental health and wellness. It incorporates capacities such as self-care, sense of self, and self-regulation. All right, so we have self-regulation as well. Then we have engagement, which suggests a state of being involved and focused when children are able to explore the world around them. With natural curiosity and exuberance, they are fully engaged. Through this type of play and inquiry, they develop skills such as problem solving, creative thinking, innovating, which are essential learning for school success and beyond. Right? And then expression or communication, to be heard as well as listened to, take many different forms. So you see also like that connection between it. It's not that there's a connection. They're saying the same things, right? So they're not connected in any way, but they're saying the same things within the different frameworks, right? They're looking at it, just using different words. So this happens through their body, through words and materials. Children develop capacities for increasing complexity, complex communications, opportunities to explore materials such as creativity, problem solving, mathematical behaviors, Language-rich environments support growing communication skills, which are foundational for literacy. All right. Just one sec. So, in this one, in How Does Learning Happen and the kindergarten program, what I have a problem with is that How Does Learning Happen doesn't tell you how to create pedagogical documentation, if that makes sense. Like with the Tawhahiki, they give you examples of the exemplars. They give you example of the learning stories that they've created, and there's lots of different ones. And they've given, there's so many different resources that are available down there in New Zealand for to support the educators in understanding what their expectations are and providing examples and that type of thing. In Ontario, they tell us to use pedagogical documentation. Well, pedagogical documentation, like it says here, is more than about than recording events. It's a means to learn about children's thinking. But what pedagogical documentation is, it is a process, right? So it's a process. It's not a thing. So I guess it's a thing at the end of the process. But with regards to pedagogical documentation, anything can be a pedagogical documentation if you're using that piece of documentation to inform future practice. Okay, so it's the and you're using it with others. So that's the process. You're sitting down with others, talking about what you see, your documentation and your evidence of learning, and trying to figure out where you're going to go next with it and what you're going to do with it. So that's what makes it pedagogical, is that if you're using it to inform your own practice and to plan curriculum, that's what pedagogical documentation ends up being. So for How Does Learning Happen to say, okay, use pedagogical documentation, and so it's like, okay, what, where, how, what? So that's the issue that I have with it. So a lot of people think pedagogical documentation, so a learning story is pedagogical documentation. Well, it's not. It's not pedagogical documentation until you go through a process, right? So it's not until you review it with the child, with the families, with co-workers. So like down here, it encourages educators to be co-learners alongside with the children and their families. That's what pedagogical documentation is. We're learning, we're reflecting on that, and going through with that. So that's where I have a little bit of an issue with regards to How Does Learning Happen in the Ministry of Education, kind of throwing this out there, but not really telling anybody what it is. Even the resources that you see about pedagogical documentation, they just continue to tell you that it's a process and it's wonderful. Okay, well, how do you do it? So that's why we're learning about learning stories specifically, and then we'll teach you the process of a pedagogical documentation would look like. So we're going to use learning stories as our medium, I guess. So pedagogical documentation also moves beyond an objective reporting of children's behavior. It helps find meaning in what children do and what they experience. And it is a way of valuing children's experience and their perspectives. It's a way to make children's learning and understanding of the world around them visible to the children themselves. So this is what also you want to do with pedagogical documentation. Is one of the key factors with this is having the children review the learning stories that you've created. Why that's so key is that it helps the child understand their own learning process, right? So it's getting them to understand what they've done. It also provides clarification for you in your interpretation of what you've written. But it helps that child with understand the way they're thinking too. So it helps with that metacognitive skills. It helps with their understanding of themselves and what they've done. But it also gives them that sense of belonging and within the program themselves. When you've taken the time to create this story about what they've done, that empowers them quite a lot, right? So we want that to happen too. The other thing, it's also a process, as it says here, a process for educators to co-plan with children and their families. And that is what pedagogical documentation does. We want to plan with our other educators, but we want to try and get as much as we can the children and the families involved with the process. When families find out what the children are interested in, a lot of times you'll find that they want to provide you with resources from themselves. They like. I had parents coming in. We had a musician. He was a guitar player. He played on the CBC. He went on. There was a train that went. I forget. When we went a Christmas train or something. I forget what it was, but he was on the train with the CBC playing music at different. So, anyways, he was one of our one of the fathers of one of the children in our kindergarten classroom. And he found out that one of the little girl's sisters, actually, so this is a story that kind of, you see how it kind of builds up. So a little girl sister, she was talking about, they were doing a little bit of music and stuff, and the little girl, the toddler, she was a little bit older, maybe around 2.5, and she was talking about her sister doing the violin. So our educator talked to, when the daughter and the mom came in to pick up the other daughter, the sibling, and the teacher talked to her about it a little bit. Said, "Oh, I heard you're doing the violin." She said, "Yeah." And she asked, "Do you want to come and play for our kids?" So she ended up coming. The little girl came and played the violin for the kids. It was. I still have hearing problems from it, but it was awesome. She did really well. Well, the dad came in as the little girl was doing her violin performance to our toddler group, and she actually ended up going up to our preschool group and doing it for them as well. He said, "Well, I can come in and play the guitar for you guys if you want. We can do that." So he came in, showed the kids the guitar, and started playing guitar with them and singing to them and things like that for each of the different classrooms. And the kids started talking about different musical instruments, and so you could see how it kind of just develops, right? And you just kind of let it happen. Just flow with it, right? And you have to slow down though, and not try to force some of these projects to come forward. But pedagogical documentation is more about. Oh, that was I have a double slide there. Okay, so that's kind of how does learning happen. And the idea around pedagogical documentation. The kindergarten program actually comes a little bit more, giving you a little bit more information about what is expected. But the How Does Learning Happen also has, like in the Tafariki, has expectations and goals. The expectations are more for the program. The goals are for the child, and what and how it's written is more for the child. But we could use those as part of our a part of the process in our documentation as well. When you're doing your interpretation, you can talk about the 4 frames when you're doing that, and kind of give an example if you wanted to as well. That makes some sense. I might try and write one up for you guys and put it up as an example, so you can see what I'm talking about. Okay. Any questions? Everybody's good? Everybody's still awake? Danielle is still awake. Danielle and Liv are the only ones awake. Oh, Jesse's awake. Sagvi, did you get your computer figured out? Liv's awake too. There you go. Zoe, are you awake? Are you awake, Zoe? Are you there? There you are. All right. So let's get into the kindergarten program. The kindergarten program, like How Does Learning Happen, has the four. It builds off of the four foundations. So we have the four frames now when we look at this. And the four frames are belonging and contribution, self-regulation and well-being, demonstrating literacy and mathematic behaviors, and then solving problems and innovation. And they're designed to support an approach that aligns with the way children's learning naturally occurs and what focuses on the aspects of learning that are critical to young children's development. The frame reflects the integrated way in which learning occurs during children's play and inquiry in kindergarten. All right. So it's really that same idea as we were talking about earlier. We're looking at that strength-based approach, the after as opposed to, I call it the before and after, kind of different types of assessments, where the one we're looking at after all the learning's happened, and this one we're capturing it kind of while it's happening, I guess, as opposed to trying to figure out what's not there. We're looking at what is there. Right? And I think with regards to the strength-based approach, we can also kind of interpret what's not there if we wanted to. But we're taking more of a strength-based approach right now. All right, so we have the four frames, which are attached to the four foundations, right, in the middle, and then what the essence or what the attempt, I think, is going to be is right now we have this. This is the early years, right? So infant, toddler, young preschool groups, and then we have the larger one, which is the kindergarten one, where we're looking at kids between the ages of 5 and 6, really. And then what's going to happen, I think what they're trying to do is slowly develop another curriculum as they're going. Now, it's taking a lot longer than I think they expected, but this would be that primary grades, right? Is it primary or elementary school first? We have the grades 1 to 3, then you're going to have the grades 4 to 6, right? And then you have the grades 7 to 9, and then 10 to 12, which are the high school years, right? So you'll see these kind of come out, I think, as they're developing and coming out with different curriculum models. But it might take like 20 or 30 years, and by that time, they'll be changing them again. All right, with the four frames, belonging, contribution, we're going to go through each of these real quick. This phrase encompasses learning and development with respect to a sense of connectedness with others, their relationships with others, and contributions as part of a group, a community, and the natural world. So you can see the same languages being used in How Does Learning Happen as it does in the kindergarten curriculum. Ways of understanding relationships and community, and the ways in which people can contribute to the world around them, and the learning encompassed by this frame also relates to children's early development of attitudes and attributes that form citizenship through the sense of personal connectedness to various communities. Right? And those communities, sometimes we think of communities as a big piece, like the Kingston community, but communities are also ones we make individually, like the classroom. Like we have a kind of a community, a learning community within our class right now, right? So that could be considered a community as well. Belonging and contribution. This one encompasses really. Then we have sense of belonging and self-regulation, and we're going to be talking about self-regulation in EARL36 next week. But we're going to be talking actually about belonging tomorrow in EARL36. But with regards to self-regulation, we're looking at their ability to think and their own thinking and feeling, and their recognition of respect and respect for differences in thinking and feeling of others, regulating emotions, adapting to distractions like squirrels, and assessing consequences of actions in a way that enables them to engage in learning. Their physical and mental health wellness in connection to this frame, it is important for educators to consider the interrelatedness of children's self-awareness, sense of self, and the ability to self-regulate. So again, you can see that connection to the same language being used in both How Does Learning Happen and the kindergarten program. The role of the learning environment in helping children to be calm, focused, and alert so they are better able to learn. And what children learn in connection with this frame allows them to focus, to learn, to respect others and themselves, and to promote well-being in themselves and others. Excuse me. Demonstrating literacy and mathematics behaviors. This is connected to the expression, I believe, where we have literacy behaviors, communication, thought, and feelings, as well as gestures. We have mathematical behaviors, which are evident in ways they use concepts of a number of different patterns in play and manage to create and evaluate information and their experiences at an emerging understanding of mathematical relationship, concepts, skills, and process, and an active engagement in learning and development and the love of learning. And this, when they, the other, the Tafahiki, in that video we watched, they talked about dispositions being important, and that's where they're trying to kind of get into with the kindergarten program and the How Does Learning Happen a little bit, in the sense of what we're trying to instill in children is this development of this love of learning, this disposition of wanting to know more, right? And learning is natural. We are learning. That's what we do. I think, in the sense of our learning. So we have to continue that to develop that love of learning and understanding the different things. What we end up learning ourselves is more about what we're interested in, right? And that's where we want to go with the kids, with the children. But sometimes we also don't recognize, because we haven't kind of branched out, we end up becoming kind of hyper-focused on certain topics. We want to branch out so we can see the whole world as well. So being exposed to different interests and different ways of knowing and different experiences allows these children to develop this love of learning and wanting to know more and to explore more, and not just be siloed into a certain perspective and just like that, right? We want them to critically think. We want them to ask questions. Why are things happening in certain ways, right? Why is this happening, right? And then work through it in that context. Problem solving and innovation. This is where we're exploring through natural curiosity and ways of engaging the mind, senses, and body, making meaning of the world by asking questions, testing theories, solving problems, and engaging in creative and analytical thinking, innovative ways of thinking about and doing things that arise naturally with active curiosity, and apply those ideas in relationships with others, with materials, and their environment. Okay, so we want to try and get them to really enjoy the learning process, as opposed to trying to make sure they do certain academic skills in the correct way. Right? Yeah. Okay. Now the kindergarten program does provide a little bit more depth into their understanding of pedagogical documentation, and do give a little bit of more direction to what they're looking for with regards to pedagogical documentation. But it is currently referred to the process of gathering and analyzing a wide range of evidence of children's thinking and learning over time, and is used and using the insights gained to make children's thinking and learning visible to the child and their families. And this process enables educators to support further learning for children in the most effective ways possible. The information about the children's learning is gathered from observations, so they are giving a little bit more information about how it's gathered. So we're looking at observations, photos, notes, which are kind of observations too, videos, voice recordings, work samples, and the interactions with children. So with regards to this, that's what we want to do. So we're going to be using our observations. We're looking at photos, work samples. You can, what I like to tell students and to tell anybody who's doing any type of documentation of children's learning is to not just focus on the work sample, the end product, but really provide the reader of your learning stories the process of what's happened, right? So, for example, that one video of the kids that you're doing your learning stories on, who are doing that puzzle, right? Well, we know what the puzzle looks like when it's complete, right? So if you take a picture of the two kids holding the puzzle and it's all complete, it doesn't. What is it telling you, right? So we want the pictures to show the process. What were they doing? What piece went in first? How was it? So you're kind of showing the process, and that helps making that thinking visible, right? That's where we're trying to make that thinking visible, showing how the children were thinking. So when you see this final picture, you wonder, did they start with the green or did they start with the blue, or did they start with the triangle, or when did the sun get put up in the sky? Like you're looking at the picture through the process, as opposed to just the work sample at the end. So you always kind of have access to the work sample in a sense. It's when it's done, unless they throw it out or whatever. But the work sample is the final product. But what we really want to see is the process and see what they actually did and how they did it, and that will also help. So when others are looking at your information and the evidence of learning, that it can be interpreted by others, right? So we're analyzed and interpreted by educators in collaboration with the children, the parents, or the family members, and begin to gain insight through the learning process. So it's about sharing with other educators, getting their insight into the interpretation that you've done, but they're also going to interpret it themselves, as well as the child and the families, right? So that's really what makes it pedagogical. When you put all that together into a learning story, and we sit down together and interpret it. And we may be right, we may be wrong in our interpretations, but that's not the point. In the sense, it's your interpretation, and then you get others to interpret, and the child can also add to that as well. And like I said, when you put those pictures out, parents and the children will gravitate to their own pictures, right? And what they did, and the children can remember what they did, instead of just saying, when you ask them, what did you do today? And they said, I played, or nothing. You get to see exactly what they did, and see it from that kind of context. Excuse me. So this one talks about pedagogical documentation some more. When a piece of documentation seems puzzling, educators gain important insights to the children's thinking and learning by taking the time to develop for deep analysis and interpretation from multiple perspectives. So that can be the child, the parents, and that of other educators. And by going back to obtain additional evidence, recognizing that learning is a complex process, educators understand the importance of slowing down. And that's one of the biggest and hardest things, I think, to do as educators, especially when you're in the program and you're running around trying to put out fires and stop someone from biting and all those types of things, and at the same time you're trying to create documentation and curriculum and that type of things. But it is important for us to to slow down and slow down with the kids. And if once you slow down, you'll notice the classroom to slow down too. Everything kind of just, it's we talked about that last week, I think, with the co-regulation. I think Liv, you brought that up, and that's really what we're doing. When we slow down our connection with the children, you'll see that connection. They'll slow down, right? And then it picks back up, right? So it's interesting. If you walk into different rooms, different places, sometimes you can feel tension in the room, or you feel I usually feel the tension, but in some places you also feel like a sense of calm and relax, like for example, a library for me sometimes. When I go into a library, it's quiet, there's lots of books around, people are kind of working and thinking and doing that type of stuff. For some reason that helps me calm. A church, maybe, for some people, when you go into it, it's quiet and relaxing. There's the Waldorf School downtown, if you ever get to go to there, that one, when you walk into that place just kind of calms you down. That's where Bonnie used to work, so you can understand why. But it is very much a calm place. So that's what we want to do with ourselves: is slow it down, bring it down, and then really take time to listen and observe and think and get that inquiry. Yes, yes. Just don't get her mad. I've seen her mad. It's not a good time when she's mad. And yes, she does get mad. Believe it or not, she does. But she does it very professionally at the same time. Unlike me, she doesn't swear. But what we want to try and do is really create that sense of slowing down. For example, sometimes we forget this, is that for the babies, for the children, the exploration of certain things, we don't, like for some children, the snow outside is the first time they've ever experienced snow, right? Or water, or puddles, or like, we have to slow down and let them have that opportunity to explore these things. We take them for granted sometimes, and that's kind of what happens when we go on walks with the kids too, right? They're so interested in all the things that are around them because they've never seen them before, or they're hypersensitive to grass, to the snow, to the sticks that are around, they're at lower down there, so you see all the rocks and the worms and all these other things when we go on this walk. And as teachers, we just want to get to the end. But where it's a child, it's really much more of that journey, right? And they're slow, and so we need to slow down with them, and just observe and document, and then we can work through it as well. But that's where we need to really slow down and appreciate what the children are doing and how they're making sense of the world, and what they need to do to make sense of the world around them. Like, I still don't understand the world around me. So it's a process, right? So we want to ask questions and reflect on the impact of their pedagogical decisions. So this is another piece of pedagogical documentation. What pedagogical documentation does, and it's a process again, right? It's not, okay, here I did a piece of pedagogical documentation. That's not what it is. It's process. So when you take that documentation and you've analyzed it, and then you take another piece of documentation and you analyze that, and your progression, what's happened. So you've done the opportunities and possibilities section, and then the next day you do that, or whenever that happens, you sit back and look at it and think, oh, that wasn't what they were interested in. So, for example, we go back to that the puzzle observation with with Joy and Jonah. Now, that's the video you're going to be using to make the learning story. That's due tonight at midnight. You're looking at that one, and you say, okay, it's about puzzles. And then, so you add new puzzles, you add bigger puzzles and things like that. And then you watch and see what happens. And it's like, why didn't they didn't go to the puzzles? They went over and they're playing and they're making a bus station. And so that's where you switch it. Now because you've done your documentation on them doing the buses. So now you're looking at it and say, okay, maybe it's not about the puzzles. Maybe it's about the bus and their buses. And then you talk to them about the bus, and you find out that they went on a bus for the first time 2 days ago, and they're reliving it over and over right now. So then you add things to it. Maybe you go on another bus trip. Maybe you go to the bus station and hang out there. We went on a bus wash once with the kids. So they got on the bus. They drove through the bus wash, and then came back, and that was just fun for them. No worries. I'll create a bus station with blocks. Angela, I'll maybe someone can share the YouTube link for the video, so you can watch the rest of the lecture if you want to. Okay. You can create anything with blocks, Corey. You just make a bus station. You just build it, and then you can have one of the blocks be the bus if you wanted to. You've never made a bus station, Corey? I used to make space stations with my blocks. Someone's going to have to help Corey out with the bus station. Oh, there you go. You built a pizza store. Yeah, you built a pizza store. There's that can be part of it too. You can build anything with blocks. That's why blocks are so awesome. Yeah. So this the pedagogical, going back again to pedagogical documentation. Pedagogical documentation is not only showing you what the child is doing and your interpretation of what they're doing. You also want to use it as an assessment for your own learning. What are you doing, right? And seeing if that's making sense as well. The block queen. Ooh, wow. The block queen. So are you a master builder then, Corey? Corey, the master builder. The block queen. The queen of blocks. But the other thing we want to do is block contest. Ooh, that might be something. We'll get Bonnie to do the judging. When we're looking at, in this way, educators deepen their understanding and adopt the practices to respond more precisely to children's needs and readiness to learn. As a part of the assessment for learning, so this is where we get kind of interesting. For learning, assessments as learning. So we have 3 different types of statements now that they've come up with this idea around assessment for learning. We have assessment as learning, and then we have assessment of learning. All right, so when we have these three, 1, 2, 3 ideas around assessments, we have assessment for, as, and of learning. So assessment for learning is kind of that prediction. So you've created, you have this documentation, you have this assessment, you looked at it, and now you're moving forward. So now it's for learning. So you're moving it forward. The as learning is you sit down with the child and you talk about it, and it becomes they're using it as a process of learning, right? They're using it to understand their own learning, where to go next. So that's that metacognitive process that they're going to be going through when you sit down with them and talk to them about their learning story. You say, come on over here and take a look at the story I made of you building these blocks, and they're going to be all over it. And then you talk to them about it, and you say, I wonder what would happen if we did this instead. So it's as learning, right? And then of learning is that final assessment in a sense of a test or a more summative approach. So you're testing them to see if they actually can do certain things, right? Which is a more traditional sense of assessment, right? So they're changing these kind of middle pieces to identify how we can use assessment. Right? So we're changing our understanding of assessment. The other thing, like when we look at it with constructivist approach, the as and for learning, when we get students to kind of grade their own process, you can get them to think of it as learning as well. It's a little bit of learning, but it also would be more of a as learning. Okay, traditional note taking compared to pedagogical documentation. Oh, from to. So traditional, so they're giving you an example, but really pedagogical documentation is a process. It's not a piece of documentation, right? It's a process. So traditional example of an observational note or an anecdotal note. So this is kind of what we did week 2 or 3, right? Where we did that anecdotal observation of within that activity. So we have Bradley built a tower using blocks today. He worked with Siri and Navid. So that's a anecdotal note for sure. There's no interpretation going on here. There's no it's very objective, right? As what he did, there's nothing to that, right? So when we look at writing more of a learning story, so I'm going to change the word pedagogical documentation because it does differ from a note, because it does, but it's not. Yeah, they're just using the term in a different way. But we want to look at it as a learning story. So learning, when you're writing your story, this is where we get it a little bit different. You're providing more information, right? It's not really much different. It's just that you're focusing a little bit more on what the child is doing here. So in this sense, Bradley said he felt tired this morning, but when he noticed that Siri and Navid were starting to build a tower using floor blocks, he perked up and joined them. All right, so that's the story. Okay, so that's the story part. This is the interpretation. Right here, they did one sentence for interpretation, and the next one is kind of the opportunity and possibility-ish. Right, so they read the story. We noticed that he is often more engaged when he's constructing things. Let's use that knowledge to see if we can spark interest in reading. Okay, so you see the 3 kind of components there. Now they don't have pictures, but they have the story. They have the what does it mean, and then they have the opportunities and possibilities. Okay, so they're using it as an observation. So then they interpreted it, and then they've provided. Yep. Opportunities and possibilities. I'm using the same words over and over and over again today. So the importance of educator self-awareness in this documentation. This is really important because, and then we'll talk about this next week, where we're looking at your own biases and your own perspectives, and how important it is to consider other people's perspectives when you are doing your learning stories, but also think about your own understanding of what you're taking interest in with the children. Does that make some sense? So, in other words, as the educator, when you're the one choosing what you're going to be documenting, sometimes there's bias in what you're documenting. Sometimes there's bias about who you're documenting too, and I found that to happen with myself. Is sometimes you get so engaged with some children, or some children are doing things that really interest you, and you become focused a little bit more on them. You find that you end up documenting a couple of children more often than you are doing others. So you want to recognize that. You also want to recognize what are you focusing on. So do you focus on art or creativity more often than you do on language, or those types of things, right? What are you focusing your attention on too? So we have to recognize that we are biased in what we're choosing to observe as well. So those are important concepts to consider when we're doing the learning stories, and when you're creating them out in your field. Is you really want to consider: am I capturing everybody? Am I capturing different things? Because if you just do it for the first few months or so, and then kind of go back and look at it and see where actually you are focusing your attention on, because we do have this lens that sometimes we will use. So we want to really consider that and reflect on that itself. All right. So I'm going to talk to you a little bit now about Reggio Emilia and the documentation panels, and how they're important. We're going to start off with a little video, and then we'll talk about their learning stories and their documentation panels. All right. So again, I'm going to just turn off my mic and things. Just give me a thumbs up if you can hear it. Okay. And I'm assuming you can also see it. So just give me a thumbs up.
You also used an expression about documentation, and it seems to me you use the word documentation as a tool, as an approach. Can you explain what you mean by documentation and what it might mean to the child, the teacher and the parent?
In general, the word documentation is known or defined an activity that means to collect documents and to put all them together, and afterwards to reflect on what has happened. What in our experience documentation means is the very important act that allowed us to make visible the learning processes of the children, to make visible how using videos, using pictures, using written notes, tape recording, what the fantastic steps that are visible through which the children move from a knowledge to another and build their own knowledge. That means their own identity, because we have to remember that we are quite often what we know, and we are what we want to learn. This establishes a very important role of documentation. Documentation, in synthesis, is an act of love, through which you go close to the child, close to the big effort that he's doing, but also you discover your learning processes as a teacher, because it's the child and are the learning processes of the child that can drive you as a teacher to learn more about what does it means to be a teacher. And what came out is not only able to show the steps and the traces of the learning processes of the children, but also the steps and the traces of the learning processes of the teacher that learn to be a teacher. And the richness of this material can be shown and shared to the other teachers, but especially to the parents, that can be participant and can find the beauty of the boy and the girl that are in their own son. Quite often the parents used to look at the son and the daughter as their own expression. Instead, through documentation, they can meet the human being that they have in front of them, and the richness also of the other children, and the beauty of being a learning community.
All right. Yeah, documentation is an act of love, and the Reggio Emilia approach. When you listen to people talk about the Reggio Emilia approach, who come from Reggio Emilia, they really talk about documentation with passionately in the sense of it is an act of love. It is an act. And like she said, when we present the documentation in a certain way, we're showing parents a different side of their child potentially, right? You're showing them the learning that child has, so it can really kind of put that child in a different perspective, and a different understanding of their of what they can do, and how they're and their competence, right, and what they're learning, and why, and what they're choosing to learn about. So that's important too. There's lots of different resources about Reggio Emilia. There's a number of different alliances or groups. There's a North American Reggio Association. There's a couple of other different ones as well. So you can see those. But one of the ones that I wanted to show you with regards to documentation, and this, I believe I have a video of, what was her name again? It was Celine? Celine? What was that woman's name that was talking? Celine? I forget. But we have, let's just see. I had this one yesterday. It was actually, just let me take a quick look here again. Just give me 1 second. Alright, fuck. I'm trying to find it, sorry. It's a little piece of documentation that is really, really cool. She talks about it again in another video that we'll talk about later on. This is the book. Right, I'll show you what I'm looking at, so that you. These are documentation panels, in a sense of. But they have a learning story over here, and then they talk about other things. So this is more of a documentation panel, exploring worms. So with regards to some of the ways that regio or not traditional, but different ways of documentation, is that some documentation you'll see really focused just on the story itself, and the interpretation is left out. Yeah, as you see, they're capturing the dialogue, right? They're capturing what he's saying, and that's very much important too. Is when you're doing your learning stories, capture what they're saying as much as you can, because when we capture what they're saying, we're able to see more of their thinking, right? So this one happens in the same way. Right, so these are different types of documentation. So they're using pictures and work samples as well as dialogue, and making quotes of the child's statements. Right. Opportunity. The one I was trying to find you was this one. It's a little girl. She's a toddler. Oh, there. Another documentation panel type thing. There's another one. What I was trying to find you is there's a picture of a little girl. She's a toddler, and what she's doing is she's sitting at a table, and she's sitting at a table, looking at a magazine. Right, and the magazine's all it's a bunch of watches, and again, I know I have a video of it, of that woman who I forget her name, talking about this project, and so I'll just give you a quick one about it. But it's a learning story about a toddler looking at a book of watches. And what she does is she's looking at the book. The teacher notices that she's looking at the watches. So what she does is she shows her watch, right? And her watch is an analog watch, so it ticks and does that type of thing. So she shows it to her. The baby puts it to her ear, and she can. So the teacher's saying you can hear it. So the little girl's listening to it and ticking. And then what she does is she makes the connection between this watch and the watch she's looking at in the book, and then she puts her ear down on the book to see if the watch in the book is actually ticking, which it's not, obviously, but you can see the connection that the child's making between the real material watch and this two-dimensional watch that's on the book, and making that connection between what the differences are too, right? So it's really interesting when we slow down with them and talk to them about things. Right? So these are more traditional kind of ways of documenting. So this is something they did, right? So they're cooking, and they're talking about the different things that they've done. They measured the ingredients and that type of thing. So it's much more about those. So there's some different learning stories you can see. Right. These, like I said, these don't have. They just have more of the story, and they have the pictures, the title, and the story, but they don't have the what does it mean, and opportunities and possibilities. I don't think they might have it, but they might add it to it afterwards. All right, so there you have it. There's lots of different ones in this one, but this is more the Reggio approach to creating those ones. There's Iris. All right, those are learning stories. these different organizations, you can go to those and have a quick look at those if you wanted to as well. But that is that. All right. Next week we're going to talk about the importance of understanding perspectives and thinking about our own perspectives when we're looking at engaging children as well. So hopefully I don't talk as much as I did this week, but we'll see. I might. But before we go, I did want to share with you the YouTube channel here for you all to go to. I just started making it, so okay, so you can have a look at it. It's right here. So what I'll do is there'll be new videos posted up. So you can see them. So I'll the YouTube channel. I gotta take a look at some of these because I don't know if. All right, so there's videos and different playlists and things like that. Okay, so I'll post this up here, and you can also the explained videos will be there. And the lecture slides will be there. I'll break them up into different playlists, so EARL61, EARL38, and my other classes. But I'll probably just post the one, like I'll probably just post this one in the mornings, because this is my second go at this presentation, so I usually fix all the problems that I had the last time. So there you have it. All right. Oh, thank you, Corey, for helping, for putting up with it, I guess. But for some, it might be easier to find the videos. I know it's been hard for some people to find the videos, but this will be able to help you out with that. All right. We're trying to make it inconvenient, like I said, for the managers. Unfortunately, we're teaching you guys, so unintentionally we end up screwing you guys over too, right? So, but we want to make sure that you do get an opportunity to see the videos. I know some of you work and have different appointments and different things like that, so this will allow you that opportunity, not to have them, but also to not let management have them. All right. No worries, Talia. Thank you very much. And thank you all for kind of understanding. I appreciate it. I know everybody does. So hopefully the videos, I'll put up the videos and hopefully they'll work. You can see them. Again, don't forget to subscribe and like. So you get all the announcements when everything comes out. Isn't that what they say with the YouTube channel, guys? Okay. Maybe I'll become that YouTube superstar. I hope they change too. I hope they change. Hopefully they change and they don't lock us out before. I have a feeling they'll lock us out in the summertime, so we don't have vacation. So we'll see. But thank you all again. I think so. I think I might. I think I might, Danielle. You guys just keep pushing the likes and subscribe, and you never know. Maybe that would be my next job. All right, everyone. Thanks again. And for the assignments, like I said, for the feedback, I'll give you the feedback for the first learning story. Like I said, we'll make sure that it's really comprehensive so you understand exactly what I'm looking for. I'll try and do that before you do your second one. Okay, so I'll try and have it graded before you're able to do the second one. Okay. All right, everybody. We'll see you all later. And have a good. Well, I guess we'll see you tomorrow. Have a good rest of your day, and we'll talk to you all again tomorrow. Yeah. Bye, Liv. Thank you again. Bye, Daniela. We'll see you later. Bye, Viviana. We'll see you later. You can do it in point form. Corey, it's up to you how you want to do it. You can write it out or point form. It's more about your own reflection with these. So as long as it's done, you're good to go for 36. Right. Thank you, Corey. And we'll see you later. Bye, Siddharth. Bye, Taylor. Bye, Angela. And German. See you. You're saying them. See you later. Nope. Click to exit.